Hello, everyone. This is Carmen from First United Land Transfer, and today we are here with a special guest, a person that will leave you feeling inspired, motivated, a story of great success, and someone who had to struggle to reach a certain level of success, the success that we're all looking for. So I'm going to introduce our friend Nelson, and he's going to tell us a bit about himself.
Okay, sure.
How are you, Nelson?
Well, hi, Carmen. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
And I'll try to do my best to inspire those that are going to be watching this. Well,
I'm sure you'll do great.
I'm originally from Cuba, and I left Cuba when I was 13 years old. That was back in 1970. So now you can compute my age. You know how old I am. So
You're 35.
thank you. So I left Cuba. Cuba was under the communist regime of Castro, and I was the oldest of two brothers and one sister. Being the oldest, my father wanted to get me out of Cuba, and the fastest way of doing that was through Spain, which was costly. It wasn't a direct flight, obviously, here. So my father approached me, asked me if I was willing to go to Spain when I was 13, something that I saw as an adventure. I had never been on a plane, and I was excited actually to do that. And obviously, my response was yes. I'll do that.
So wait, your father, his great idea to escape communism was to ship you off to a completely foreign country as a 13-year-old.
Yes.
I have a 13-year-old son, and I don't think I would let him go to the corner store by himself. How does a 13-year-old make it out of Cuba on his own, and where exactly did you go in Spain?
Well, just the reason for that, at 15, when you turn 15 and you're still in Cuba, you become military age. So you get drafted, and you're not allowed to leave the country until you're 27 years old. So being the oldest, my father was trying to gain some time by getting me out of the country, because then he gained another 6 years. My brother was 6 years younger, so that's what he was trying to do. And that's the reason for, being sent to Spain.
Who did you know in Spain?
I didn't know anyone. So I arrived to Spain. I didn't have no family there, but the Catholic Church had a camp where they put all the kids like me. I wasn't the only one living this way. Actually, there was children leaving Cuba on a weekly basis.
Like a refugee.
Exactly. So we were in a camp that wasn't being used by the Spaniards in the winter because there was actually no heat and no hot water. So they allow us to stay there. Arriving to Spain, it was very, I guess, emotional. I had not seen, number one, I had never been on a plane and never, and especially for 8 hours. And then arriving to Madrid, a huge airport like JFK, I was completely bewildered by what I was seeing. There was a gentleman representing the Catholic Church that, waited for us. There was another 5 kids, I think, that were on that flight with me. So we were taken, and we met the priest that actually was responsible for the program. And after visiting with him, we went to this camp that was about an hour by train from Madrid. So there I spent several months waiting for my family here in the United States to do all the paperwork and do everything, go through all the requirements of immigration to bring me here.
How did you communicate with your parents back in Cuba, with your family members that I assume you had never met who lived in the United States, right? I mean, back when this happened, there was no such thing as cell phones or smartphones. So you're a baby practically at 13. Where do you carry the information?
Well, obviously, communication with my parents was very rare. I think maybe in Spain, maybe I talked to my parents maybe twice during that whole time. And the same thing was with my family here in the United States. As you say, there was no cell phones, and it was just landlines.
You got a piece of paper with a phone number and La Tia Lola written on it, and you're supposed to be responsible at 13, acting like an adult who's really on a mission.
Exactly. And that's part of the whole experience. But to answer your question, I had a lot of free time in my hands when I was in Spain, so I wrote a lot of letters to my parents. So that was basically the main form of communication between me and my parents in Cuba during that time.
How do you end up in the United States?
Well, my father had already, two brothers and a sister that lived here in the United States that had left Cuba back in the mid-'60s. So they were already established here. And my oldest aunt, Belinda, she lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. And she was basically the one that coordinated everything and did everything that was required to bring me over. So I went to live with her.
At what age now?
I was still 13, almost 14. Okay. So I went to live with my aunt, Belinda, and my uncle, Amado, which, it was second parents to me, obviously. And I went to live in Indianapolis, Indiana. So that was a rude awakening, being in a place where there were no immigrants. I was the only immigrant, and in the junior high.
Did you speak the language by then?
I did not speak the language. And I got there in June, and my aunt was a Spanish teacher, so she was able to get me into summer school. And I started summer school with the purpose of accelerating my, learning of the English language.
So you took ESL over the summer, English as a second language?
No, there was no ESL back then. There was no ESL in Indianapolis, Indiana, with only one immigrant in the entire school.
I can imagine. So you lucked out. It was almost like the stars aligned for you. You come here, you're escaping communism, you go first to one country where you're alone, but at least you can understand the people, right? And then from there, you're here in the United States, and now it's a completely new experience where you don't speak the language.
Exactly.
You probably looked like a frail little Cuban boy, right?
That was very
Were the kids nice to you? Were they kind? Did they take you in?
Actually, that is funny. The kids in Indianapolis, Indiana, even though I didn't speak the language, I was treated as a movie star. So I was very well received. I had a lot of friends, people that just wanted to hang around with me, even though I couldn't communicate with them. I even had a girlfriend, actually.
Wow. Make your father proud back in
So now, talking about the receiving point, and I want to make this, when I first arrived to Spain, to this camp, there was around 50 kids. That change and varies between 40 to 70, depending, because as every week new ones will come in. There were older ones that were coming to the United States. So when I arrived there, that first week was very difficult. We were bullied constantly. We were by the ones there. We were, we had the captain of the table when we had dinner, and that captain, decided whether you were going to eat or not, or
At school.
at that camp. Yes.
Oh my.
So it was intense
Mm-hmm.
bullying that first week. It was almost like hazing.
Yeah.
Being admitted into the group. But that quickly passed when the new ones came in the following week. And then now you were part of
The
the
cool
old
kids
guard
crowd, of course.
doing the bullying and doing the hazing. And
Oh.
so.
Well, I hope you learned something from that, and that
Uh,
bullying is such a big topic nowadays.
Yes. Yeah.
But you experienced that. Now, how long before your parents make it into the United States?
Well, I lived with my aunts and uncle for several months, and they were well established. They lived in a ranch home in the outskirts of the city of Indianapolis, and I lived there until my parents came. So I moved to Miami to live with them. So here it was a very big shock in the conditions of where I was, living the middle class,
The suburban
suburban
living
home.
in the
So now I went to live in Miami in a one-bedroom apartment. It was 5 of us. I slept with my brother
Of course.
in small bed, and
But
we
it's
lived-
almost like a thing, right? Where like Cubans, if you're from Cuba, you have to live in Miami
Yeah,
or
it
like
seems
somewhere.
that way. You have to do your
It's like
time
right-
in Miami,
you do.
even though if you move on. So yeah, that require a big adjustment. Now we lived in not such a good area. We were a mile from the Miami International Airport, so now you can imagine the 747s buzzing by, every couple minutes or so.
No sleeping in that house.
So it was a difficult transition. But,
And you
do
stayed.
adjust.
You stayed in Florida until you were.
There we were, in Florida, we were there very short time. Conditions, I was back in now 71. And economically, Miami, at least for my father, wasn't doing very well. We didn't have, like I said, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. It was 5 of us, no cars, So we ended up moving to Vineland in South Jersey. Okay. There was work there for my parents. He had a cousin, and that's who basically allowed us to move with him.
Your father, even though you guys had come, you came so young. By now, I'm assuming by the time you're in New Jersey, your brother's already here as well. And he started to encourage you to go to school, to get an education, a career, because you didn't start out as an investor.
That is correct. My parents, they value education, and they encouraged, all of us three, to go to college, get educated. It was the means of getting ahead financially, okay? And, all the time, my father had 2 jobs. He worked in a food factory, but he also was a handyman, working for investors like me now. And I was his helper. I worked with him after school. I worked with him on weekends. And little did I know that was going to be the basis of well, at least part of the basis of what I did. But going back, yes, my parents created an expectation for me to go to college, to get educated, and for me to see that as a way of climbing the financial ladder.
And you got you got a bachelor's degree in what?
Yes, I ended up going to Rutgers university, the School of Engineering. So I graduated as a in New Brunswick. So I graduated as a civil engineer in 1979.
Good for you.
Right after that, my wife had not finished school yet because we got married before we finished school. So I decided to start my master's in civil engineering as I waited, for her to finish.
Right.
Okay. Now, so that is basically the answer. Yes, I did not start as a real estate investor. I started as a civil engineer. That was my profession.
You got your engineering degree and then ended up in the Lehigh Valley. And who did you work for? Yeah.
Well, before I said that, shortly after I graduated, I wanted to buy a property. I didn't want to pay rent. So the only thing that I could afford was a 2-family house, which needed a lot of work. And that was my first investment property. I remodeled the first apartment to be able to rent it and get money coming in. The mortgage was 17% interest. Back in 1981, that's during the oil embargo and high inflation, and then they start raising the rates. And that was another lesson that I learned. I didn't have a cap in my sales contract, so I closed at 17%.
Wow.
But actually, I'm glad that I didn't have a cap because that gave me, number one, I started to learn the business. And also, that property I flipped a year later, and I made more money in that flip that I made as an engineer for an entire year.
You caught on pretty quickly. Nowadays, when the younger generation goes to want to buy these big houses, I hear so often, people educating them, no, buy, a buy level or buy like a duplex where you can have the income. And now, right. With one rental property, it probably covers their entire mortgage. Exactly. You didn't even have somebody guiding you. No. You just kind of figured this is the smart way for me to live and make money.
And also it was out of necessity because I couldn't buy a house on my own with those interest rates. I didn't want to put myself in a situation that everything I made was just to pay a mortgage. So this was a way to really lower my monthly expenses by having a tenant. So it wasn't really at the beginning that much of an idea. I'm starting as an investor, but I started as of need to do that. It was after I flipped the house and made that money that I decided this is a good way of making money. This is and I liked it. And the other thing that also allowed me to learn was I didn't know that I was so handy. So all that work that I did with my father as a helper became very useful as I repaired that house, which, between my wife and I did. And so I did everything there, from carpentry to plumbing to electric to laying tiles, the works. And I think it's a good time for me to say this now. Even though my parents didn't leave me any money, they really provide me the tools to be able to do what I do now. Number one, push me to get educated, to get an education that allow me to get the money to be able to make the investment into the properties, and then having worked with him, I learned how to do the work myself and use the tools. So yes, even though he didn't leave me money, he gave
left you
me
something
more than
greater
that.
than that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we say there's a saying out there, you can either give someone a fish and they can eat it that one day, or you can teach them how to fish and they'll have food for a lifetime, right?
Right.
So for you, need led you to create an opportunity for yourself.
Exactly.
And you were now finding yourself thinking outside of the box and thinking about your future, right? So you left your job as an engineer.
Yes. Basically, after I flipped that first house and I said, wow, this is great. I like doing this. And the first thing I did, I dropped out of my master's program. I needed that time to go and work on houses. Those evenings of studying, I needed to do work. So that was the beginning of my career as an investor. And yes, to answer, going back to what you asked me, the reason I came to this area, to Allentown, that was back in 1982. Okay, I already had quite a few rentals in New Jersey.
In New Jersey as well. So it was
I started in New Jersey.
Yeah.
That's actually, and I started buying in South Jersey because I started this business with a very good friend of mine, and he went to law school. He became a lawyer, and I was the engineer. So between us, we bought quite a few homes, and we flipped quite a few homes in South Jersey.
There's something great that I have to point out. So I met you at a settlement, and the buyers for the property, because obviously you're the seller, right? You've been selling a few homes since, especially since, the pandemic started. I think it's become a great time for people to get rid of a few properties, right? So one of the things that I really enjoyed being a part of was that your first and the second settlement we did together, the buyers were already your tenants. So you started this kind of pattern of, creating homes that your tenants would eventually want to purchase. So kind of like a rent to buy.
Correct.
And how did that happen? Was that on purpose?
When I first started, and before I was flipping properties here in Allentown, after I moved from New Jersey, which I did because I started working as an engineer for PP&L. I was a project manager in the nuclear department, and I worked doing that for over 20 years. At the same time, I was buying properties and doing all that work. Going back, I don't know how I got the time or managed to do that. But as a landlord, what I noticed was that I would lose my best tenants because they wanted to buy their own home.
Of course.
So I realized, wow, it would be really nice if I continue to flip houses here in Allentown, and then I can sell them. I can buy the property, fix the property, and then help the tenant get a mortgage and get them to buy the house. Obviously, like I said, I knew who the best tenants are.
Right.
And I knew they would qualify. It was most likely they would qualify. So I would focus on those, and I will ask them if they wanted to buy and have their own home.
So you were giving them an opportunity as well.
So correct. So I already knew the kind of houses that they were looking for, how many bedrooms, because I will ask them to describe the home that they want to buy. So as I was fixing homes and I had this going all the time, I already knew pretty much who the prospective buyer was going to be, because if I was, fixing a 3-bedroom, I already knew, which of the tenants wanted a 3-bedroom.
Of course.
So I would offer it to them. The house was renovated, it was ready, and besides that, I help them go through all the different stages of being a homeowner. Many of them I took through the NHS program
Yes.
for first-time home buyers. They went through the school. They get, so during that whole process, I got them prepared
You educate them on
to, so that they can apply for a mortgage and then, and buy my house. So that's really how that started. So at that point, it was mostly flipping the houses, buy them, fix them, sell them. But then I also accumulated those, single families that became rentals, and they're still rentals.
I want to ask you the craziest question. From 1981 till 2022, I can't even imagine how many homes you have flipped, you have bought, you have kept, all the way from Pennsylvania to South Jersey to
Miami.
Miami as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot to accomplish. How do you, number one, how do you manage all of the properties? Who is part of your team? And how do you build a team that you can trust, right? Because you're only one person. And that they can help you maintain all your properties, help you find the right people, and also help you, passing it forward to your tenants that you're trying to prepare in terms of getting a mortgage. And
Yes. Well, at the beginning, I was pretty much a one-man band. I had to do it all. I would even help my lender to pre-qualify my tenants. So, but as the business grew and I kept buying more properties, basically, I realized that the key to keeping all this thing going was to have a good team around you, starting with the sales agent. Work with Craig Sheridan, which I purchased. I would say probably 90% of my homes with him. He knew exactly what I was looking for and the type of property that I would buy, where, so he read me completely. So it was pretty easy, He will do the homework and find me the properties, which it was very rare that I say, no, not that one. So when he called me, it was pretty much, yeah, that one looks good. So having, the agent, having the lender, I currently work with American Bank and Univest. Back then, I started with Patriot Bank, that became Susquehanna, which became BB&T. Anyway,
now
also having a good closing agent as part of your team is also essential. So having those pieces working as a well-oiled machine makes it very easy.
The secret to your success, you'd say?
I would say yes, the whole thing, having that team. And remember, I used to work 8 hours a day, but it required very little time and effort from me. Once I just made the decision, yes, I'm going to buy the house, that automatically went to the lender, that went to the closing company, and it was really the sales agent, the real estate agent, that made that that wheel starting to turn, and it didn't really require any of my time. Then back then, when all those people were working, I already had people, contractors that did the renovations. So I wasn't doing that anymore. I couldn't. So it was also part of that team.
What is the message you want to send out to, number one, realtors, investors, immigrants overall, right? Because most immigrants, I'm an immigrant, haven't experienced what you've experienced in your life. They haven't had to escape a communist country or And there are some who have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're still pushing along. But I guess what was it that drove you? And how have you maintained so that, they can hopefully look at you and say, well, if Nelson can do it.
Yeah, I think those experiences, if you look, maybe people will concentrate on the negative of that situation, but in reality, if you focus on the positive, it was an experience. It was a learning experience. Number one, at 13, I was really already a man. I don't recall having a teenage time period.
You weren't coddled. I think a lot of, the kids now, we look at them and in comparison, you probably think, my God, I was so mature at that age. But you were thrown out into the world and you didn't have a mommy and daddy running behind you, making sure that you didn't fall, you didn't scrape your knees,
Well, that's another thing that I used to raise my own kids. I was always very independent since I was very little. I had a big family around me, so I would spend time with my grandparents, and at their house. My aunt would take me to vacation. I was being out of my house for a whole month, so I was already a very independent little kid, and they could take me anywhere, and I wasn't calling for my mommy and daddy.
Yeah.
And that helped me in that transition when I found myself alone at 13. So again, that's a message I would say for parents. Make your children independent. Okay? That's really, in my mind, that's what I used. I say, as a parent, what is my role as a parent? My role as a parent is not to give my kids everything they want, but is to make them as independent as possible, so that in the event that I'm not around, they can continue to move on
Teach
without
them how to
me.
fish. That's right. Yeah.
So I think that's part of the message, I think, as a parent. Also, to parents, is make sure that you encourage your kids to get educated. For the most part, I think education will give you that bridge, to move up in the financial ladder.
I'm a big fan of, I tell my children that college is not negotiable at home. However, I will say, I think that education and, getting educated now has different realms, for lack of a better term, because not everybody can go to college. Not everybody is made to go to college.
I agree.
But if you can't go to college, I think there should definitely be a trait, a specialty, something that you can hone for yourself, because everybody can do something.
Yes, and you're right on what you're saying. Not everybody is made to go to college. But I think, and this also is a message for the parents, say, oh, you have to go to college. I don't think that's really what you want to do. I think the main thing first is to know the strengths of your children.
Yes.
Okay? If there's a kid that for whatever reason, they were just born that they don't like school, well, find the strengths. So don't push them to be in college, but push them to utilize the strengths that they have to be able to be successful.
Yes. Nelson, this has been a great time talking to you. Is there anything else that you would like to share? Something that, will be impactful? Not that you haven't been, because I think everything about your story has so many lessons for us to learn, right? But is there anything else that you want to share that we haven't covered, that hasn't come up?
No, I think, again, the main message that I try to give now is, again, what I mentioned about the parents, education, the way of moving up, and try to look at the positive part of your experience, because not, maybe even though you're thinking maybe bad, and I thought maybe at that time when I got there and I got beat up in Spain, but there's a positive theme that you can draw from that. So, and also that don't feel like a victim just because you're in this country, you don't know the language, and you know maybe you don't have the money, you're going through difficult times. Don't view yourself as a victim, but use it to your advantage, because I think the opportunities are still here. That's what I tell my kids, to be able to get ahead if you're willing to work hard.
Right.
Love what you do is very important, okay? Because then it won't feel like a job. And that's something, and I add that, my wife didn't understand why I worked so much. I said, how can you just work so much in this house? I said, well, listen, the part that you don't understand is I don't view this as work. This is just a hobby. It just happens to make me money.
That's good. Well, and for you, you've already gotten to the pinnacle of your success. You have done it all. I'm sure you took risks. I'm sure you were afraid at some point, but they say if it doesn't make you a little scared, then the risk is not that great, right?
Yeah.
But with great risk came great success for you.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sitting with us and for sharing your story and inspiring us, and for being such a important face in the Lehigh Valley, because you have done so much. I think a lot of people know you here, and a lot of people know what you've done. So that encourages everyone. So thank you.
No,
and I wish you much more success.
Thank you.